almost at the end of the first quarter of 2022. I'm delighted today to be joined by Mr. Amir Sharifi, the first time on our podcast today, the CEO of HY24 and Energy Transition Lead at Ardian, and one of our regular commentators, Cornelius Mathis, Chief Executive Officer at DII Desert Energy. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for joining us today. So for the next 25 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about hydrogen infrastructure. Specifically, we have a lot of conversations about hydrogen on this program, but we're going to be trying to focus a little bit on infrastructure and seeing where the status of that is, both in the region and globally, and what the challenges are and solutions are being presented to sort of move that forward. We have a few bulletin headlines there, news headlines for our viewers, and also, Amir, perhaps I can go to you first. I hope you had a chance to look at those. We'd like to start the program by asking whether any of those grabbed your attention and why.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. Of course, the one that struck me immediately is number 6, which is Germany and Norway agreeing to build a hydrogen pipeline link. First, because if it's a hydrogen infrastructure topic, but also because I think there's a direct link between this decision and the fact that these two nations want to reduce their dependence on Russian energy supplies in the current extremely sad context that we are seeing in Europe at the moment. So I was struck by this news in particular, because it's quite a gigantic move if it were to happen, and it happens in the context where if we have maybe not fully realized our dependency on gas and Russian gas in particular. Maybe if I can give 2 figures to illustrate that. Basically, today gas represents 24% of total energy consumption in Europe, so it's more than renewables, and it serves for power generation, for households, for industry, for public services. So we are very much reliant on that, and 40% of that is coming from Russia, effectively. So and in the context of what is happening, the prices of gas have massively risen. Also the coal prices and the oil prices, so all the commodity prices are all over the place, also power prices. So it has become extremely difficult, and we need to reduce that power dependence on Russian exports. In absolute figures, they represent roughly 170 billion cubic meters per year. So that is a big figure to be replaced. But based on our assessments, I think roughly 20% of that could be replaced through hydrogen and renewables. And that's where I think that number of initiatives need to be taken to accelerate the pace of hydrogen, to create more local source of energy production, and renewables combined with hydrogen provide that source. But also you can kind of also find ways to reduce the dependence on the LNG terminals, which today are very much saturated by doing so. So I think this news for me was quite striking in this context.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, Germany, as we've seen the last month, has really ratcheted up on many fronts. One is this particular project, and of course, on the military front, it's changed course as well because of what's happening with the war in Ukraine. There's clearly some policy changes across the board. But of course, I mean, initiatives like this, like all hydrogen initiatives, Amir, just staying with you for now, it will take time. I mean, yes, hopefully lessons will be learned from dependence on Russian gas and moving forward. Will initiatives like this, do you think, be pushed quicker as a result? These are 5 to 10 year targets, aren't they, or more? They're not going to resolve today's problems. But do you think that, we're seeing a bigger push for these kind of announcements? And will we then see this scaling up quicker than we were expecting?
I think so. I mean, one of the key reasons is that one of the key hurdles to hydrogen economy starting and accelerating has always been the cost of it in comparison, the cost of green hydrogen in comparison with the cost of gray hydrogen. Because effectively on all the other dimensions, everyone agrees that hydrogen is bringing a solution because it can be stored, it can be transported long distances, and it can be applied in many applications where oil and gas can be applied. So, and it's zero emissions. So on the fundamentals, everyone agrees that it's really a good solution, but the issue is the cost. And here, what is really striking, what is happening is that if you're able to source your power from a known generation source, so therefore not buying your power from the grid, but therefore having your own renewable energy capacity built on purpose for green hydrogen production, and that is the case in many locations, effectively your cost of that green hydrogen is effectively already now, based on the current gas prices and CO2 prices, more efficient than doing it with gray. So that is going to be a game changer for, I think, many off-takers that were reluctant to take the leap, because even without public support, you already are at that parity that we were expecting to happen in a few years from now. So that's for me is a major change that is happening in the current environment.
Okay, Cornelia, sticking with cost, and you're more focused on the MENA region. Let's take that point about sort of being able to scale up, and of course it's all about cost and investment into the technologies that are needed. But let's talk about the infrastructure. Again, from the MENA perspective, where's the progress that we're seeing on these kind of partnerships like Germany's just done with Norway and Europe? But of course, MENA is going to be a great source of that hydrogen, isn't it? And it's going to be sending it to consumers in Europe. Do you think it's more important, in terms from the off-taker point of view, to encourage investment, that we have local off-takers here in the MENA region, or are we going to still look at this model of here in the region we're supplying the West, if you like?
Yeah, I think it's very important to be flexible, to be bold. I think anyway, the projects that are massively happening here, look at the year 2022, but also last year, from basically nothing, huge projects came up, and even some purely commercial ones, like Neom Green Hydrogen, which is named now the former Helios. So this is an amazing development. At the same time, countries, the ramp up plans, the UAE published the hydrogen roadmap at COP26. Saudi has concluded 8 MOUs on applications of hydrogen. Egypt, I was 2 weeks ago, meetings there with the energy minister, has big plans ahead of COP27 now. So I think in terms of progress, both on concrete projects and government initiatives, that's, I think, all happening, and it's happening probably faster than many people expected. So that's very positive. On the international partnership side, this is really not only a historic opportunity, but it's an imperative. You've seen, the DI team was with the new German Minister of Economic Affairs and Climate Action this week in Abu Dhabi, and several of our partners signed agreements. For some of them, we were instrumental, in preparing them on production, supply, trade, on basically making the value chain happen. And this is really wonderful. But what we need is, and during last week's Hydrogen Week, the first Dubai Hydrogen Week, we launched 2 important things. One is a ports initiative. And as we have first ports joining the MENA Hydrogen Alliance, like Abu Dhabi ports, and we had the CEO of Port of Trieste from Italy, Italy is #1 port. So we have international ports as part of the alliance now. So ports will play a crucial role as hydrogen hubs. This is #1. And the second thing, this is really the most important thing. Without this, nothing will happen on your first headline on hydrogen trade, and transport. And this point is really certification. It is about an internationally coordinated, it can start with bilateral agreements, but it is all about certification to start coordinated in an internationally accepted scheme to make trades happen. That's a thing. We launched a working group as well on certification, transport and storage, where we have also as co-lead the head of the Certify program in Europe. We have H2 Global from Germany, by the German government, which will run the international tenders. We had the Power to X Hub, from the Ministry of Environment. So these kind of international partnerships for these topics are the crucial ones. And without such schemes, nothing will really happen.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, part of that is cross-border as well, international carbon pricing mechanisms. I mean, you're talking about certification of how we define hydrogen, what it can be used for, etc. But we haven't really reached, I mean, the world hasn't reached, an international agreement on carbon, has it yet, in terms of pricing, in terms of certification across the board. So how Cornelius, just sticking with you, I mean, what is the solution to reaching that goal, to getting that certification in place, which will, of course, in turn encourage at the back end, investment in the first place into this?
That's a good point, Diala. Well, on carbon markets, at least we go in the direction on the voluntary carbon markets here. So there's different initiatives in the right direction. So this step by step will come. I think would be naive to think if you have, internationally coordinated carbon markets. There's more than 30 carbon markets globally. The European carbon market is, of course, putting massive pressure. The carbon price literally exploded. It was very volatile recently. Now it went almost to 100, then lost a lot down to 60. Now back up again. But this is one piece, and it is obviously indirect, like phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, which absolutely needs to happen fast, because otherwise, net zero is completely without any credibility. Or COP27 Egypt now, COP28. I would expect personally that ahead of this, fossil fuel subsidies are phased out in an accelerated manner. But certification on green molecules, or actually we are over the color discussion, and we've been always technology neutral SDI. We support all technologies for emission-free technologies, and in hydrogen, obviously, to reduce emissions as fast as possible. And in this context, we need a solid certification on the entire life cycle of hydrogen. So we need the life cycle carbon content, or better emission content. And there we are working on, and this will be very challenging to achieve. And then in Europe, maybe just to also support Amir's point he made, that's a very powerful one. We are all of a sudden, in a situation where before we talked when green can become competitive with blue hydrogen, or now green hydrogen is cheaper today in Europe than gray hydrogen. And it's not only a matter of price. So if you look today's price of gas and the carbon price, we're probably at €7 per kilogram gray hydrogen. And green obviously can be significantly cheaper. But in addition to this, it's a matter of having gas at all. Gas is becoming an extremely scarce resource. So in this context, having these agreements, and Norway is of course a potential supplier of blue, but also green hydrogen. And I really want to stress our point. We're always stressing in international partnerships. We've been long advocating for this, which is an Eastern Mediterranean hydrogen pipeline, which could be on a similar capacity like Nord Stream, maybe around 60 gigawatt. And this could be built in a few years from now. We need a Marshall Plan. The window is now. It's an absolute necessity for Europe to make this happen.
Okay, well, I mean, the Marshall Plan and the windows now. Amir, I mean, HY24, you manage, I think, the largest fund, which is dedicated sort of to green hydrogen infrastructure investments. Are you seeing people knocking on your door to give you cash? And has the recent sort of hurdle of energy security and the sort of heightened, obviously, situation that we're having, especially in Europe, in terms of energy costs, has that sort of reversed the appetite to invest in hydrogen and such solutions, or and sort of brought in the more? No, we need to keep investing more in immediate energy in parallel, yes, with new tech, with new clean energy. But how has that impacted your fund management, if you like, from that point of view?
So we are targeting to raise a 1.5 billion fund. And I'm very pleased to say that things are going extremely well. So we're very close to reaching that target now, whilst we're targeting to get there by summer. And where we are right now is that we're already very close to that target. So I would say that we have had, since the start, we initiated our initiative, we had a lot of appetite to invest into this fund, and this was initiated also by industrial corporate groups like TotalEnergies, like Vinci, like Air Liquide, that were willing to be part of that story and to create an initiative that would be systemic and build up the ecosystem with a kind of a combination of industrial and financial investors together in a common vehicle. So we're effectively delivering that promise, and things are going very much in line with expectations in terms of the capital that we're raising, but also in terms of being able to deploy those funds into active opportunities. We have already made our first 2 investments as of February, and we have a third one in line to be achieved by end of Q1. So we have not only capital raised, but also we are seeing that our value proposition is interesting for target companies that can see that with a dedicated hydrogen infrastructure product, we are sophisticated enough to understand the needs of certain development companies or downstream mobility companies that are not necessarily an easy play for traditional infrastructure funds.
Yeah, and I mean, and how much of that funding is going to pure technology solution investments rather than, you know, more of the same, if you like, or literally physical infrastructure investment that we know what it is? Is there enough going into R&D and being targeted to that new technology, let's say, if indeed it's required? Well,
our fund is not focusing on technology and R&D. This is not our purpose. We are there to support the creation of infrastructure and or the expansion of infrastructures on upstream, so production, and downstream, meaning mostly on mobility side of things. But without
that investment, let's say, from elsewhere into tech, those infrastructure investments don't make any sense, do they? So where you know, do you see a parallel enthusiasm into that? You know, we're seeing lots of pilot projects, and where, you know, are we getting that shift into the next stage, if you like? Technology?
Well, at the global level, as of July of last year, there were $500 billion worth of capital expenditure announced by industrial groups, of which I think 150 billion were at a level of high maturity, so either planning or post-investment decision stage. But still, 2/3 of that 500 billion were still for things which were a bit early stage, so including R&D. So there's still a massive amount of money that goes into the R&D phase of development of number of projects. But I think we're past that, basically, generally speaking. We are past that because the technology is very mature and has been along for a long time. I think the main issue is to scale up what is existing. So, I mean, either you're using an alkaline electrolyzer or you're using PEM or something else, but effectively, the point is not that these are new technologies. They've been used for a very long time in the steelmaking industry with a number of existing applications. So the point is that we want to make those reach a size of 100 megawatt plus for each single project, so that we reach a scale where economics are becoming more effective.
Yeah, and Cornelius, just to come back to the region where, of course, this region has a natural advantage of natural gas resource, and so blue hydrogen is a natural route to follow, and indeed is already being done so. But from an infrastructural point of view, that also depends a lot on the CCUS commitments that we've already seen, obviously, in this region. But maybe they haven't been enough. What's your opinion on that in terms of, I know we're going to say we're going to go colorblind, but let's talk about blue hydrogen, because that is obviously somewhere which can move very quickly today in this region. Do you see that hesitancy on the CCUS front holding that back?
No, I think naturally, as you rightly say, Diala, the region here, and particularly countries like obviously Qatar, but also the UAE have significant gas resources. Saudi has, Egypt has. So there's a natural interest and let's say focus on these kind of topics. I was recently with the head of the National German Hydrogen Commission to meet the CEO of ADNOC, Sultan Al Jaber, and he was very clear that it is about blue hydrogen, and there's big projects there, and as well as green hydrogen. And to be honest, I find it quite impressive. This new joint venture between ADNOC and Mazda, this new green hydrogen company, which is specifically earmarked as green hydrogen, actually such a massive focus from blue to green. I think ultimately, markets will decide. So it's a combination of technology costs. It's also client demands. So Europe is has opened up on low emission hydrogen. We're not talking about colors anymore. Even nuclear can be an option, and particularly in this acute phase, of a massive issue with security of supply. The Asians, they love blue. They just want to have low carbon, whatever, and they don't even care about certifications, these kind of things. So I think the market will tell. To be honest, I personally tried. I was speaking to different companies on the CCUS side, and I never understood really in detail where the real level of maturity is compared to green hydrogen, because people out there, they say, yeah, blue is fast and so on. I have my personal doubts that blue is more mature. Obviously, there are synergies here, with oil and gas exploration, these kind of things, industrial plants that are existing in the region. There's certain capabilities. But I have personally my doubts that blue can be ramped up faster, and so on and so forth. So I think we will closely follow here on the factors I mentioned. And ultimately, we are very pragmatic about this. The markets and the clients will decide.
Yeah. And I mean, as you said, there's of course a lot of progress been made here in renewables and costs there, which is why you could be right that perhaps green may take off eventually and overtake blue from this part of the world. Cornelius, just sticking with you on the policy front here, and Nina, compared to Europe, and can policymakers here in the region learn anything in terms of best practice on how Europe has approached the hydrogen argument? Europe is ahead on its green sort of path in that sense. But is there, from an infrastructural point of view, can this region learn anything from a cross-border pipeline infrastructure point of view from what Europe has already indicated?
Well, Diallo, to be honest, Europe was good in hydrogen strategies, also hydrogen valleys, these kind of things, pilot projects. The hydrogen strategies are there, the ambitions are there. On 8th of March, Europe announced basically quadrupling. So we're speaking about almost 300 gigawatts of equivalent of hydrogen by 2030 now. So the objectives are all there. On the execution, on the regulatory side, Europe is a complete mess. So Europe really needs to wake up that with what is currently happening, also with RED III and the Hydrogen Act, nothing really will happen. We actually point on India, for example. India has a much more pragmatic scheme, and India is doing really great things, not only on renewables, but on green hydrogen as well. Here in the region, anyway, the big objective is now to get bold strategies, bold objectives. The UAE started with the hydrogen roadmap, but the big strategies, they need to come out soon. And then I think these partnerships will be instrumental.
Yeah, and I mean, the public-private partnerships, of course, here they have the funds as well in terms of national cash to pursue these, but especially at the moment with the prices that we're seeing. Would you agree, Amir, that Europe is a mess from a policy point of view? I mean, that was quite a statement from Cornelius. And I know it's figuring out its taxonomy and it's had delays on that front, etc. Do you think policy in Europe is stymieing investment efforts on this front?
It would help to get more clarity on policies in a number of areas. One recent one is policies relating to how to support mobility on zero carbon mobility in particular, where there have been a bit of back and forth around that. And I think we need to be able to create corridors of places where you can have a good density of stations, and having guidelines about that and support from different member states of different European countries to establish those infrastructures of charging, because this is basically what the OEM need to see to be able to launch their big series of production of heavy duty vehicles. And on that front, I must say that a bit like we've seen at the beginning of some major changes when we switched from horses to cars, and from then establishing the rail industry, etc. There was massive support from the different governments to make that happen. And I think we're at a point in time where we're at a similar, magnitude of change towards zero emissions, and we probably need to see that effort translated to policies. And I think there's a lot of, the Fit for 55 ambition is gigantic, and it's a real game changer. So we are really very pleased to see that, but the translation of it into actual policies and support is taking a bit of more time, which for the investor perspective is not always so helpful.
Yeah, and Amir, is it from an off? Let's just look at the question of off-takers, the actual sort of people who are going to be committing to take this hydrogen in Europe. Again, do you see any particular hard to abate industries coming to the fore ahead of others? Are there any obvious targets there?
Yeah, well, the steel making industry is the one that everyone has on their tongue, basically, because you need hydrogen in that industry for desulfurization for iron metal, and so this is basically where it's like the quick win that you can achieve, and in particular in the current context where the gray hydrogen has become so expensive. And that we're seeing efficiency on the other side on green, we can see that things will move more quickly. The other one, which is also gaining pace, is all the ammonia and the e-fuels mechanisms. Demand side of things, where effectively you can see that the CO2 penalties that are being imposed on the fertilizer companies in particular mean that they need to switch to CO2-free sources of production of such hydrogen derivatives. I think this, again, we can see today big appetite from some of these off-takers on the fertilizer side, or even on the commodity trading side.
Cornelius, we're running out of time. We've got maybe time for one more comment from each of you. Cornelius, I'll go to you first. What would be your, is that one of the, if you had to choose a top solution, what's the next big priority to get this hydrogen engine moving even quicker? What solution do we find? Is taxing or penalties one of those? Is that one way to kind of encourage this process more, taxing certain sectors unless they switch to certain uses? What would be your top sort of mind solution today to get this hydrogen infrastructure moving quicker?
Well, from a European point of view, I would say definitely be pragmatic and get a certification scheme internationally in place and think bold. So, Nord Stream 2 is now 11 billion euros buried under the sea. It will never be used. South Stream, or let's call it Eastern Mediterranean hydrogen pipeline, that could be an investment between 15 to 17 billion with 60 gigawatt capacity. And there's even existing pipelines. So be bold, move today to make these things happen. We need, of course, governments to get such infrastructure off the ground. So I think be very practical, very pragmatic.
Yeah, and your point on certification is interesting. At the moment, it's all been about estimation, but actually getting it down to sort of qualified, defined certification is very important. Amir, we'll let you have the last word. Biggest solution or biggest hurdle, and what's its solution today for the hydrogen market to take off even faster than it is?
I fully agree with what Cornelius was mentioning around pragmatism, but I would add to it consistency in between what has been announced and getting it into action from the different public side. And I would say that certification as well, I fully agree that it's a key topic, in particular in the context of, as an investor, many of our pension funds and insurance companies need that we go towards more transparency and demonstrate that we are really solving the CO2 problem. On our side, we are an Article 9 fund under the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. So that means that we need to demonstrate that we are effectively reducing and abating CO2. And having a certification will make things much easier in this respect. So I think that is also a very nice way to make things simpler and accelerate the pace.
Okay, well, thank you, Amir Sharifi from HY24 and Cornelius Mathis from DII Desert Energy. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today for the Energy Transition Dialogues podcast. We've unfortunately run out of time very quickly. So wishing you a good remainder of the week and hope to see you soon. Thank you to our viewers as well.
Thank you, Yala.
Thank you so much.